Good evening, everyone. Welcome to VBC Scuttlebutt for Monday, January 27th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And we've been around for 16 years. Our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We have a sort of obscure episode for you tonight to talk about TARPS. Chris Bacon is with us tonight. Chris, if you'd like to give a wave just so everyone knows where you're at in the window frame. We'll be getting right to you here shortly. But excited to have you on board for our conversation about TARPS and the USS Saratoga and Air Wing, which I've learned a lot about even just in the green room. But with us tonight is co-host, co-pilot, Todd DiPastino. You're in Key West right now. Is that right, Todd? No? Yes? Oh, wait.
Boy, oh boy, I'm having some problems here. How are you, Sean?
I'm well. Are you in Key West?
As you can see, okay. Um, I am not at my usual desk. I am, oh my God. Hold on.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I was getting something else, a completely different video in my earphones. I'm in Key West, Florida.
So you're beating the cold weather up here in Pittsburgh,
Yes, I
and
am.
enjoying some time away.
Yeah.
But we get to have your presence tonight, so I
Yes.
appreciate you being on with us despite being down in Key West.
And I just want to say before we start, I want to thank Greg Yost for reminding me today that today is Holocaust Remembrance Day and it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I read just a little bit about what happened at Auschwitz today. 56, I believe, survivors went to Auschwitz, visited, made some remarks. So it's a solemn anniversary.
Thank you for that, Todd. And yes, Barb, you were also in Barcelona, so you're staying up late to join us tonight. You're probably the furthest away from Pittsburgh, where we're streaming from. Bob Oles, did I have that right? Oles, I think. I'm happy to
Ols.
see you, Oles. I'm happy to see you back after last week when we got to drill you a bit about your service. It was nice to see a friendly face.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Well, tonight, like I said, we're going to be talking a bit about TARPS, but we're going to dive into Chris Bacon's story before we sort of get to that point. Chris, I'll ask you to unmute here. And we'll chime in later about 8 o'clock with the little station break, tell you guys a little bit about what's coming up with the VBC. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on the program. I really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Absolutely.
By the way, quick question for you.
Yeah.
This is the Breakfast Club. It's breakfast for who?
You'd be surprised by how often we get that question. Other than our wonderful online programs that we get to do after dinner, we do get to do some in-person breakfast, though the snow's sort of keeping us from doing those here in Pittsburgh right now. We'll get back to those probably in April, which you should come to Pittsburgh for. If you've not been to a VBC breakfast, you are missing out. They are incredible. Story-driven events where we get to just have a ton of veterans in a room and share stories. So I highly recommend it, and not just because I work for the VBC.
I'll take you up on that, Sean.
Please do. Chris, you're in the Navy. I'd love to sort of start back before the Navy, though, and find out if you came from a military family. And I heard you say something in the green room about that.
Yeah, I did. I've been honored to have a family member in every major conflict in the century. So yeah, multiple generations.
So you're saying like World War I, World War II, you've had sort of the family history with that?
Or two, Vietnam, Korea. Yep.
All Navy?
No, every branch. My father was in the Navy, but outside of that, I think he was alone in that.
So did you always know that you were going to go to the military?
I don't think I would say that. I think I was always honored to be part of a military family, but I don't know that I actually saw myself as being the next generation to do that. But it worked out that way.
Did you have siblings?
I did not.
So you were an only child in a military family. Did your dad like say military is your route? Like this is what you should do?
No, I would say it was maybe the opposite of that. I'm not sure. Well, first of all, I was living with my mother at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'm pretty sure actually. My father didn't know I had intentions of it at the time. My mother was supportive to an extent, and she had to be because I was 17, so I needed her written permission to let me in. I think she did her level best to convince me otherwise, but I think she also realized that she wasn't backing me off it.
So if you hadn't joined the Navy, what would your route have been?
I think that was the key there. I didn't have a route. I didn't have a path, and I think the Navy seemed like the right one at the time.
So you didn't really consider the other branches.
Oh no, I considered them all, but there was only one other branch that would let you in at 17. That was the Marines, and picking between the two, I think what it boiled down to was what I was actually going to do in the military.
Yeah.
You know, the Navy came back with a couple opportunities that were unique and they sounded interesting to me.
So
That kind of pointed me in that direction.
so like your basic training, I know after basic training you went to photo school, but you had already sort of selected that prior to basic?
Yes, I did. So took the ASVAB test. They came back with multiple offers. One of them was kind of unique, and that was photo school. Now, conditional, I had to sign up for 5 years to get it. There was a couple others that I had to sign up for 6 years, which, at 17, like seemed like a giant commitment at the time. So kind of settled on the one that had the 5 year commitment and guaranteed what I was going to do for a living. At least I thought it guaranteed what I was going to do for a living.
So photo school, were you into photography prior to the Navy, or what drew you
Yeah,
drew you to that?
I was. Well, I should say I had an interest into it. Took photography in high school. Liked it, enjoyed it. Felt like I had a inclination that would be something that would be of interest. And the recruiter, now this could have very much been a lie, but the recruiter had made the comment that he'd never seen another person actually come up with this offer. So I do think it was one of those roles that, in the Navy, if you got it, it was a good chance you'd stay in for life. And it was an interesting opportunity for me. So I jumped.
What year was that?
That was 1988, 89, somewhere around that time frame. I joined in 89, but that would have been the time frame in which I would have selected it.
Was that at that point sort of considered peacetime? There wasn't really a major conflict going on?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Did that in any way sway your decision to join the Navy or not?
No, but it probably swayed my mother's decision to allow me to go in.
Oh. True.
Yeah. We had been in conflict for greater than 10 years, but I think yeah, who knows? I think, would that have changed my decision? I don't think it would have, but it's really hard to make that call.
So we know, like, the basic is usually sort of a culture shock in a way. Did your dad prepare you for anything? Did he give you any advice?
I was well past basic before my father figured out I joined.
Oh,
so,
wow. What did he think of that?
Surprised.
Yeah.
I think was probably the answer, but I grew up in a lot of different areas. So I grew up in Sicily to a large extent. Spent some time kind of bouncing back and forth in different parts of most of them Navy towns, but between the separation between my mother and my father, I wound up in Canada and wound up moving around the country and then back to Canada a couple times. It was kind of an interesting upbringing, but a lot of it was Navy towns, as you might imagine. So it was an exciting opportunity for me.
So, I've sort of flagged as sort of I was looking into your background and your service history. Like I flagged photo school because we've talked to like Army photographers before, but this seems different. I don't think we've spoken with a Navy photographer, and especially sort of the specialty that was this photo school. Can you lead us a bit into like what your expectation was going into that school and what you were planning to be taught?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't know that I had a good expectation around what it was going to deliver. I think TARPS was probably not in the top 100. I mean, I'd never heard of TARPS, as probably no one in this call actually had. I I don't know. I think I had an impression of, being in different parts of the world, taking pictures of things that were going on. And maybe a bit of it was kind of what you'd expect from an Army photographer standpoint. But I was more accustomed to the Navy, obviously, because of my father's service.
So the idea of TARPS, Tactical Air Reconnaissance Pod System, was this something that it had already been around for a little while when you went to photo school? Like like it had already been tested and you understood what you were being taught, or was this something that was still in development?
Yeah, they don't teach you TARPs when you go to photo school. They
Okay.
teach you the basics of, well, I shouldn't say basics. They teach you how to be a photographer. So I think at the time, Navy was investing roughly $27,000 to every person that went through photo school. So, I mean, you're essentially a professional photographer. And then a little bit of the shock and awe that can mean anything after you graduate. So,
Right.
much like other areas, you graduate and you get a list of opportunities. My list contained an awful lot of fighter squadrons. And
And that was what your next assignment was. Like they taught you the ins and outs of photography and then said, okay, you're going to be working with this pod system that's attached to F-14s, a part of an air wing.
yeah, that's pretty much spot on. So you graduate, depending on where you graduate in the class, gives you your ranking and your opportunities. I graduated at the top of my class, but when I looked at my opportunities, it was largely of a lot of fire squadrons. So some of them were deploying at different times, so I knew that. I didn't know much about them other than it looked like there was a few of them where there were multiple opportunities, and one of them specifically, it looked like me and a buddy that I was serving with, basically since boot camp, would wind up having the opportunity we could go together, and that was kind of an interesting opportunity for us. It deployed. Think of the squadrons having kind of a steady state aircraft carrier that they're deployed with, meaning when that aircraft carrier deploys, you're always deployed with that aircraft carrier, or normally deployed with that aircraft carrier.
Mhm.
And the Saratoga, VF-103 was attached to the Saratoga, which deployed out of Jacksonville, Florida, which was one of the many places that I'd actually lived. So that was particularly attractive for me.
Uh, and where was the photo school and how long were you with the school?
Yeah, photo school was in Pensacola, Florida, which I went to basic in Orlando, and then photo school in Pensacola. Basically a large opportunity to kind of stay. Oof, that's a terrible photo. We should get rid of that immediately. They
This,
gave tons of opportunity to kind of stay in Florida,
Mhm.
which seemed super attractive for me. Now, Fighter Squadron 103 was actually based out of Virginia Beach, Virginia, Oceana. But anytime the Saratoga, it gets worse.
It's
Anytime the
worse.
Saratoga deployed, I would deployed it to Jacksonville and then meet the Saratoga and then deploy from there.
And this photo, I'm assuming you're all of 17. Like this is,
Oh yeah, every bit of it.
so even looking, this is maybe a bit later then.
For sure, for sure. The first one has me as an airman. The second one has me as a petty officer.
So can you help me understand? I always like that Todd and I get to say that we ask some dumb questions. So the difference between those two, like like the petty officer, we understand, you go into the Navy, that's where you start. What was your like what is the specialty here?
Now, so you go in the military as an enlisted as an E1. So that's for me that was a, call it airman. So
Mhm.
and then there's airman 1, 2, 3, and then you become a petty officer. So petty officer succeeds airman.
Mhm. Okay, so that's the sort of the second step.
That's right,
Um,
or fourth.
and since you only really understand photography then out of photo school, when do they really start to teach you the TARP system?
Um, so you're deployed to the squadron. There's a basic amount of kind of OJT, and then when it's convenient, you go back to go back to get your education specifically around TARPS.
Mm-hmm. What did you think about the TARP system when you first started learning it?
I mean, it seemed fascinating. Knew really nothing about it, but it kind of comes pretty quick when you get that opportunity.
I'm gonna pull up a picture of we keep mentioning TARPS, but I think it'd be easier for people to sort of visualize. If you've seen any footage of F-14s during this era, you may have seen this pod-shaped system underneath. And this system had, was it 3 cameras on the system?
Yeah, that's right. So in the front of that pod, you have a kind of a low level. I think it was called K87. I think it was K87. Basically, it's one camera, but it can be positioned in the forward position or straight down. So think of that as a low level. You fly down 10, 15,000 feet, get perfect aerial photographs for that. And the second one, that little black strip there, that's a panoramic camera. So perfect for kind of figuring out bomb trajectories or figuring out troop movements as it relates to panoramic views. And then the last one, which you can't really see the bay for it because it opens up, is the IR camera. The IR camera was perfect for figuring out where tanks were moving or other large aircraft were moving. You could see the heat signature in the path. You take the picture at night, you can see where it's moved in the daytime.
That's really advanced for like the era that I'm thinking of. Like that sounds scientifically advanced.
Yeah, that's the way I felt about
it. So it was impressive, is sort of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it was. It was. Think about it. Time and place. This is kind of the dawn of satellite photography. Wasn't zero zone drones at the time, so your ability to map out a country was cutting edge at the time.
And you mentioned, I want to flag that when you talked about the camera in front, that 10,000 to 15,000 feet that they had to fly to take these pictures, like from what I read, that was actually very dangerous for them to be able to take pictures at that altitude due to anti-aircraft.
It was, but it would also get you below clouds. So your ability to get really high resolution photographs, just as an example, you could actually pick out somebody standing in a window drinking out of a coffee cup. That camera could get you there.
I feel like maybe, that sort of gives us an idea. We're going to get into sort of what your job was within that system in a minute, but let's know when you got deployed, was the USS Saratoga your first deployment?
It was.
What was it like onboarding?
Well, I mean, it was a super carrier, so it was basically a floating city.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly unintuitive, but also surprisingly efficient. I basically was on board for better part of 5 years, more than kind of 2.5 years deployed, meaning at sea. Mm-hmm. There's still parts of that ship I never found. I spent a good bit of my time actually on the flight deck, which flight deck is a different world. So think of jets taking off the front, jets recovering on the side and the back, and then all manner of life happening in between. So jets spinning, dodging exhausts, sliding under intakes, kind of praying the tail hook doesn't drop in your head when you go into the back.
Right.
Prop planes teach you really quickly that you absolutely know nothing about physics. Tractors driving all over the place. These 220 power cords everywhere. Hydraulic fluid, flying object debris. Basically, sensory overload.
What's the smell?
Is deafening, and you have almost no visibility.
What's the smell like up on the deck?
It's better on the deck than it is below.
Probably because of the men, right?
That's right.
Rich asked in the chat, how many crew members?
5,000. A little more than 5,000.
Okay, so I do see Ben and Brad both had questions about the pod system. We're going to get to those, gents. Real quick, I'm going to take a side note. Right. Trey, I knew asking you would not be a mistake, and you did not disappoint. Thank you so much for that. And you can see in the chat, everyone really enjoyed it, and I did myself. And I'm sure, Chris, I always like to ask because it interests me, and in working with the BBC for the last 4.5 years, you tend to hear the Navy guys talk about their ships enough that you're like, man, these guys really love their ship. And you may not have known the history of the Saratoga before you got on it, but did a sort of, I want to say, love affair with the Saratoga sort of happen overnight with you, or was it just something that maybe developed, or did you ever really even care about your ship?
No, I think it's one of these things where you live on it on a day-to-day basis. You don't really take into consideration that as much until you see how other people react to it. So for us, it was basically a floating motel where we landed our plane. So our attachment was really the squadron, less about the ship, up until you pull into port and see how other people react to it. Like when we pulled into other countries, the fanfare around it was actually quite amazing. But we hadn't really thought about it that way. The way we thought about it was, this gets us to where we need to go, and we park our planes on top.
Does it become then sort of a more romantic idea after you retire?
It did for sure. But even as Trey was doing such a good job of kind of sharing the highlights of the Saratoga, I kept going back to, he must have called out sluggers a dozen times. That was my squadron. The affinity for me was always more the squadron than it was the aircraft carrier. But they were always together.
You bring up an interesting point, and this wasn't in my notes, but the idea of the squadron. So after you got assigned to it, does it take a while to be integrated into that sort of that subculture, that squadron that's been around for a while? Did you make friends immediately? Did it take you a while to sort of develop a rapport with everyone?
Yeah, you got to earn your way in. It's not given to you, so it's not a job. The integration has to be earned. But no, I think once you're in, you're in it for life. I still today follow the folks that I served with in the squadron. We still communicate. Talked to two of them today. I think once you wore that jersey, you don't get to take it off.
So it was exciting, I think, right?
It was. It not exciting going to a football game, but exciting like we were tied to each other. It was all about the mission. It was all about being successful. And it still follows you. But I think it probably will always follow us.
Rich, you asked about the average duration of a deployment. We were talking about the cruise that you're on after you're deployed, and that was 6 months.
That's right. 6 months. There's usually a couple workups to prepare you for the 6 months, meaning you don't just deploy for 6 months. You deploy out for a couple weeks. I think it starts 1 week, and then it's 2 weeks, then it's 3 weeks, and then you go for the 6-month deployment, called workups. And then you come back and you do all the maintenance that you didn't do for 6 months. So planes suffer a bit of the consequences for 6 months of active duty at sea, and then the cycle kind of starts all over again.
And when you joined the squadron, or I should say, when your squadron joined the Saratoga, it was in the Mediterranean. That's when you first onboarded?
Now, when I first got to the squadron, I think we were a couple weeks before one of the workups, probably the last workup before the cruise. So I got to enjoy kind of one of the workups. Came back for a couple weeks, and then we deployed. We deployed in August for our, call it, normal 6-month deployment. Timing was coincidentally aligned with when Iraq decided to invade Kuwait. But that just dumb luck, if you will, like happened the same week.
Oh, wow. Did that change things for you? So as this kicks off in the Middle East, how did your view and responsibilities within the military change?
Well, it kind of changed everything. Typically you're on station in case something happens. In this particular case, something happened and it changed every aspect of what we were going to accomplish. I think we were supposed to leave on the 7th, and I think we probably did leave on the 7th. 3 or 4 days prior, the invasion happened. So we spent I think it took us 5 or 6 days to cross the Med, which is almost twice as fast as we would have normally gone. So I think we got to see what the Saratoga could do. I think it was the fastest crossing since World War II. Like we were moving. So we were on station within a week.
When you say on station, you mean like within?
Yeah, we headed to the Red Sea.
Okay.
Basically, the way it started off, our job was to stop all ships from bringing contraband into the country. So I think we stopped 1,500 merchant ships. Like that started immediately, and then it evolved into obviously January 16th. We're turned into Desert Storm. Technically January 17th.
And during this whole time, you're with the squadron, but you're in the TARPS system, working within that like that mission.
Yeah. So think about it this way: we flew thousands of sorties, trying to figure out what ships were moving where, trying to figure out what troops were moving where their weapons were stored, what was going on in the country. And that's where they used TARPS. Basically, we mapped out the entire country and mapped out any movements that were happening up until the point where we started strikes.
Like in real time, I think that was one of the questions earlier. These photos would come back to you guys in real time?
Yeah, well, not real time, but I mean, an hour or two, they would land. We process, like we would have imagery within an hour.
And you weren't, you went to photo school to learn how to take pictures, but were you the person running the pod? Like running the cameras?
No, we would take these pods and think of it as a couple. It's basically the size of a Phoenix missile. We would mount the pod at the bottom of the plane. We would load the cameras. We would launch the plane. We would do all the troubleshooting related to it. And then when the plane would land, we would recover all of that information, take it down to CDIC, and then one of the team members would process it. And then we'd give it to an analyst who would look for specific things. Generally, the RIO would have an idea when they saw particular things, so they would give some notations of, hey, this point in the flight, we experienced this or we saw this. They would look at that film and see what they could figure out. There's the forward camera that I was talking about earlier. That's what it looks like when the pod's open.
This is an image that I wanted to get to. So this is like the photographs that would be brought back and taken below deck to be analyzed.
Yeah, that's one frame there, but consider some of these, depending on which camera you're talking about. Actually, that's the smallest frame, but that's like one frame out of thousands.
So it occurs to me that the pressure to be able to analyze this and give actionable data and intel on what you are seeing from the pictures was probably like you get the camera back and then in an hour, but then like to develop, analyze, and report on to be able to fly the next sortie or fly in the next day, you guys probably were working mostly around the clock during wartime.
Yeah, I always felt the biggest pressure was ensuring that we didn't send a pilot and a RIO up with a non-working system, which was a big struggle. Like this stuff wasn't set it and forget it.
Mm-hmm.
for me, it seemed like every other mission we get up on the deck, we'd load it up there. Part of it was the fact that the temperature was so hot in the Red Sea. Like if two pieces of film touch each other, it was basically super glue. You could not physically pull it apart. So you had to thread it just so perfectly. And like we would do these things like try to freeze the film before and then run it up as fast as we possibly could, hoping we could get it into a cooled environment quick enough before it would actually just basically turn to super glue. We did all kinds of little tricks trying to get these missions off, but the challenge was getting it into the air working, because you only have a few minutes. Like once the pod's loaded, once the plane starts, there's a problem. You're underneath there trying to get it to fix, and you got 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 10 minutes before that thing needs to be on a cat and being launched off the plane, launched off the deck. That to me was where the real pressure was.
Ben had asked, did the pod have sensors like infrared or anything else a part of it?
It had all kinds of sensors, and had its own cooling system. It was actually a fairly complex piece of machinery.
Let me bring that image back up again, and like everybody can take a look at it. So this is probably a rudimentary breakdown, I guess, of the idea of what everything was doing between the frame camera, the low altitude panoramic camera, which we went over. There's the infrared reconnaissance, data display, the winch. You have all of these power supply cable. So this was all powered by the F-14, and it was, as we understand the F-14, there is the pilot in front, a co-pilot in back, and he's the one that ran the system.
That's right. That's right. And this, you can't really tell in the orientation here, but I guess you could see it in the previous photo. Basically, if you're looking at from the front of the plane to the back of the plane, it was on the belly on the left-hand side.
Okay, so a little off center.
Yep, that's right.
Can you tell us sort of what information you were attempting to get from the photographs? Because I mean, other than sort of troop movement or terrain or, tanks, things like that, that's sort of, I can only imagine like a tank's moving somewhere, you can sort of take a picture of it, but you may not know where it's ending up. You just know in that region, there's a tank that's going to be relayed probably to ground troops.
Yeah, so think about it maybe more in this way. You take a panoramic photograph of a base. You see two dozen tanks outside of it. You take that same picture the next day, and they're not there anymore. Like that certainly gives you an indication. If you do it at night, you can actually see what direction the tanks moved based off the infrared. Like the concrete's a different temperature. Like those are the type of things you could get from it. And with the infrared, you could take it at 30,000 feet. Like no one even had to know you were taking it. So it was incredibly useful intel.
Now, in this sort of time crunch of getting the photographs and gathering intel from them, how many men did you have working to sort of gather that as quickly as possible?
Well, the TARPS, our TARPS organization probably had 10, I think it had 10 people in the shop. So, but that covered 2 shifts. That was night and day. CVIC probably had another half a dozen people focused on the actually analysts and actually producing the actual film. Maybe not even that many. So I'd probably say less than a dozen.
Colonel Brad Washbaugh, who is also Desert Shield, Desert Storm veteran, Marine veteran. Brad, did you know anything about the USS Saratoga 1, about TARPS, but you also had a question in the chat?
Yeah, being on the ground during Desert Storm, I don't think I saw any aircraft above us. They were flying very high at night. Maybe you'd see some blinking lights and whatnot, but you certainly felt the effect when they dropped their ordnance. And we got lots of intel, maybe too much, too many pictures, a lot of things that almost paralyzed the commander with where do we penetrate? Where do we attack the Iraqi defenses? There was a lot of concern about fire trenches, mines, and that's true, they were all there. But where was a soft spot to attack? And basically, it took Marines on the ground to go forward and probe, really, to confirm or deny some of the intel that was being gathered. But my question, Chris, thanks, is what level of security clearance was required for the personnel operating the TARPS and the technicians and the analysts?
Yeah, as far as I know, everyone in TARPS had a secret or above clearance.
What was the most surprising thing you saw from a TARPS image or intel? Is there anything that really stuck out that said, wow, look at this, look what we got that was so astonishing or important?
Um, the For me, I thought the most interesting thing, and it wasn't necessarily related to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but I found some of the photographs that they pulled specifically of submarines super fascinating. Just because you don't expect them to come back with that, and then they see it as a byproduct of a mission. I don't know if it was actually intended or they expected they would see it, but as you're looking at the film, it's like that's a sub. How
Yeah.
cool is that? For me, I always found those things particularly fascinating.
So on the carrier, how many TARPS units would you have in your squadron?
We had, I could be off by one on this. I think we had 4 jets that were capable of it. Not every jet is. And then we had at least 4 pods. I think we may have had 5. At any given time, 3 of them was working, to give you kind of an idea. But on a day-on-day basis, generally we never use more than 2 pods.
Would the pilots or backseaters require any special training? And if so, how long would that training be?
Yeah, I don't know how much training they went through, but any operator that was using the pod system had gone through training on it. Think of it as they're not actually just kind of pushing a button and taking a photograph. They're turning the thing on, and it just runs. But they need to know which camera to use and what angles to use it. And like I said, I never went through any of that training, but all of them were trained.
And how bad did you want to jump in the back seat of a Tomcat?
Oh, it was killing me. Right before I joined, they allowed enlisted people to take them up to troubleshoot them, which I think would have been incredibly useful. Now, a bit of that self-serving because I wanted to be in the back of that thing so bad. But yeah, no, all of us did.
Well,
I do, and I'm only a civilian. I agree.
well, thank you for your support during Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
I did get launched off a cat, but unfortunately, it was in a prop plane. But it's still cool.
How much would one of these pods cost?
No idea.
I would assume quite pricey, pricier than my Sony Cyber Capture, but and they would come back.
No, I mean, my assumption would have been probably tens of millions, but no idea.
Enough for the Navy to say like, hey, you need to have special clearance to touch one of these things.
Yeah, I think that was less about the cost and more about the technology that was in it.
Right. How many photos would they come back with? One sortie comes back. How many pictures?
It could be thousands.
Wow. I just want everybody to imagine that.
But do you mind if I jump in here,
Yeah,
Sean? Because
please.
I'm curious about something Brad mentioned. Rich Kensinger echoed it here in the chat. I know Chris Perillo is on. He's a Navy intelligence communications gatherer. I guess we assume, or I would assume that, you want as much intelligence as you possibly can, as much data as you possibly can. But can it be too much? I mean, like Brad said, could you gather too much and you're overwhelmed by the data that it's hard to sift kind of what's important and essential and what isn't?
Well, I'm positive that's the case. I suppose I look at it more from the realm of if you didn't take it, you got no chance of getting it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they often erred on the just keep it on as long as you possibly can. In most cases, we tried not to reuse film. So even if it wasn't exhausted, sending you out with a quarter cartridge didn't make sense either. So, for the most part, we encouraged take as many as you can.
Paralysis by analysis, what Doug Dwar said in the chat. I unmuted Chris Parolo here too. Chris, does that sort of ring true with you too?
Yes, yeah, that's always possible, and I think there's some historical events here that 9/11, for example, so much was coming in, but nobody was really reading. But it's interesting. You have all kinds of aspects of intelligence. Where I was working in was, and they have this abbreviation, comment, communications intelligence, SIGINT, signals intelligence. In this case, Chris was working in FODINT, photo intelligence. So you would find something and learn something, and through electronic intelligence or communications intelligence. Now it's like, we need a little verification here. Let's send, if we can possibly do this, let's get some photo intelligence on this. So we would capture the stuff that would determine the targets to go look at. In many cases, not in every case, but in most of the cases there. So Chris was involved in the physical verification of what we were electronically working for. And on a personal note, I served aboard the Little Rock, and we steamed with the Saratoga many times, because in those days, I'm talking about mid-70s, 75, 76, 77, Sixth Fleet kept two carriers in the Med most of the time. And they would overlap for a month, and then somebody would leave, and shortly thereafter another one would come in. But in the height of the Cold War, there were actually two carriers. The ones I remember most are Saratoga, the FDR, the JFK, and the America, as always rotating in. And there was always plenty of activity. And if you want to see pictures of that collision there's a whole bunch of photos on how close they came to a collision with Saratoga, which was mentioned earlier on the Little Rock website, USS Little Rock website there. But yeah, no, this is, yes, you can be overwhelmed, but hopefully your analysts and everybody know what they're looking for, or have a clue, and they'll zero in on what that is. But it works for the most part. But yeah, you can be overwhelmed sometimes. That's all.
I have no doubt. Thank you for your service.
Same.
Harold Faust, how are you?
Good. Yourself, Todd, and everybody else.
Good. How does an Army guy like you know anything about a Navy F-14?
Well, it might have something to do with the fact that my dad worked his entire career at Grumman
Oh, got it.
on Long Island.
Got it.
They built the F-14 and the Hellcats from World War II, and a lot of other planes before they got taken over or combined with Northrop. So on Long Island, their main facility was at Bethpage, and there's almost nothing there of Grumman anymore. It's Grumman, Northrop, probably mostly on the West Coast. But my question was if Chris ever ran into any of the Grumman people involved in the training, and did they build the pod as well as the F-14? Do you know?
I don't know if they did. We had a bunch of civilians. My assumptions were they came from Grumman, but we had a bunch of civilians that would come out and provide intel related to the pods, especially when we were back.
When you're in port, right?
Yeah. Well, we actually flew a couple out too when we had some problems we just couldn't get past.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. The technology would, like, you keep shipping the same part back and back and back, and they keep sending it back out, working as designed.
Yeah.
Eventually something has to change.
Yeah.
We made sure a few of them they couldn't send back.
Just to throw in another thing for Grumman, they also built the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module, that landed with part of the Apollo, landed on the moon. So they had some good engineers there.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Harold,
I
I
still
see-
think the F-14 was an amazing jet.
Harold has the model behind him, and I said, I think last week when I was prepping everybody for our discussion tonight, I was saying how the F-14 was my first love. That's right. It was my first love. I think it's every kid's first love, and then I grew to love the F-18, and then the Raptor.
How about this guy? Recognize that? Intruder?
You gotta lift it up a little higher. It's
Okay.
A6.
Yeah, A6 Intruder,
Yeah.
also a Grumman plane.
First time I saw an A6 fully loaded.
Okay, these models were not from the store; they were for Grumman. So it's like solid plastic. It's not a kit that you put together.
Well, in Desert Storm, when we saw them fully loaded with 1,000-pound bombs. They'd go off the edge of the deck and disappear, and then eventually come back up.
Wow.
And all of us were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it made it."
How many stories up from the water is the deck?
Oh, it's going to be 100 feet.
And it would drop just.
Like it would disappear. It would go off the edge, and it looked like it was going in the water. It was that weighted down with bombs, and then it would come back, and it was light.
I'd love to fly back in the back of the F-14, but I don't think I'd want to take one of those flights off an aircraft carrier. Justin, we'll ask you to unmute.
Oh,
Like,
did I unmute?
Yep, you're good.
Christopher, I'm a little Army helicopter pilot. We didn't have any of that stuff when I was flying around. But I talked to a friend of mine. Now, I understand that the system was an analog system, wasn't it?
it was.
They had to bring the pictures back and analyze them on the carrier.
Yep.
And he said, well, he flew Tomcats. He flew the system off the Enterprise. And he said the landing had to be perfect because 2,000 pounds under you meant you had to be almost empty in fuel.
Oh.
To make the landing weight qualification. And I said, so what did you do? He said, prayed a lot. Now, wasn't that was from analog to what, Sharp?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. The negative was almost an 8x10 on some of them.
Right.
Like, if just imagine this. Like, I think it was in the last 10 or 15 years that digital has reached the true capacity to match a 70-millimeter negative.
Oh,
We're talking something that's 5x that.
right.
The sharp is not an appropriate statement. That, like, it's unbelievable. So that technology at the time, I'm still shocked that it even existed.
Well, he kept saying, he said, it was sort of interesting that the Enterprise being the first carrier, and that it was nicknamed the Mobile Chernobyl. And the Kitty Hawk that I landed on in the South China Sea out of Vietnam for some retrofit on helicopters was had not such a nice name. But thank you very much for doing it. You sparked my interest, and I think we've sparked a new visitor to the show.
Well, thank you, Justin. Appreciate that.
No, I did 5 flights to the Kitty Hawk to retrofit for HF radios so we could go into Cambodia. I took everything I could take to get launches, never could. But when I brought back peppermint ice cream to my commanding general, I can no longer do any wrong in the division of 25th.
There you go.
Thank you again, Navy. No Marine discussions tonight, okay?
We only just started letting Marines join us. They're all right.
They are okay. Their guys always called us, the 25th Division in South Vietnam, when they needed help because they knew we would come because we had helicopters we didn't worry about destroying.
Well,
Anyway,
I'm not going to start the Navy versus Marine argument.
thank you much.
Thank you, Justin. Chris, we're going to take a quick station break here. We'll come back with a bit more questions here in a minute, but
Okay.
I wanted to get up my PowerPoint here to just briefly thank our sponsors, let everybody know sort of who we are and what we have coming up here in a couple weeks. First up is Tobacco Free Adagio Health. We just want to thank them for sponsoring the VBC. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use. You can find out everything they have to offer at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. Thank you so much for sponsoring the VBC. We also like to thank UPMC for Life. They can help you make sense of Medicare and get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. They can help you save you money and get you more benefits, and you can view all your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. We will have a survey in the chat. Everybody knows about our link. Please fill it out. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. Just lets us know how we're doing. We're already a month. Can you imagine it? We're already a month into this year. We only have one more program this coming Thursday with Glenn before the end of January. So it's a good time to just let us know how the last month has been. If you'd like to see future programs as we start to build out through to summer, if there's any ideas or thoughts that you'd like to pitch our way, we're always open to that. And we also have a VBC magazine. You can see there on the left, that was the most recent one that went out. What is a Veteran? That was our fall issue. This is a free quarterly magazine that you can get from the VBC. All we need is your address. If you don't get it, let's just, yeah, we don't have your address. Send it on our way. We'd love to get this out to you. And we can send you more than one copy. So if you'd like 10, 25, or even 100, if you say, hey, I go all around my community, I meet up with people, I'd love to just put them at the local ice rink or at the mechanic, at the library, we'd love to ship you a box so that you can help us get the word out about VBC. And we also have coming up this Thursday, like I mentioned, Enemy Heroes of World War II. These are soldiers or officers who were a part of either the Japanese or the German side who may have worked with the Americans. Todd, do you know anything about Glenn's sort of preparation for this? I didn't see Glenn on tonight.
Yeah, he's going to have quite a few guests who are Colin Heaton is one of them. Marilyn will be joining us and sharing stories that they've collected and they've researched over the years of kind of remarkable moments of humane interaction, I guess you would say, between allies and enemy. And it's kind of an inspiring and interesting program we have planned. That's Thursday night.
Absolutely. And as I looked at our future scheduling, we do have a Jeopardy plan. Everybody loved our Jeopardy programs from last year. We're going to have another one coming up in a couple months as we sort of flesh out our questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Excellent. So we'll let everybody know when that takes place. And then next Monday, we have a screening. So we have a screening of a film next Monday night. You need to register for this film, for this screening next Monday.
I'll hop in here. Yeah, this is a little different. This will be for Monday, February 3rd. We are screening a film, a 90-minute film documentary called Black Uniform. It's an interviews with 12 Black veterans from various ages. I think the oldest was a member of the 688 Postal Battalion, and that wonderful Black unit, all-female Black unit that went overseas in World War II. And on down to more recent veterans. And it's just a discussion and a kind of a conversation with 12 Black veterans. And then we're going to have a conversation with the filmmakers and some of the veterans featured in the film. So that'll be Monday, February 3rd. It will be, because of copyright, we will be watching it in a closed Zoom environment. So you do have to register for the event, and then we will send you the Zoom link. And then we'll have an open conversation after the film screening, and that's next Monday, February 3rd.
So make sure you check out our website, go under events, online events, and then you can pre-register there. We will also be sending out our e-blast. The registration link will also be in the e-blast. So make sure you click and sign up, and we'll see you next Monday night for that screening. That does it for our quick station break. Chris, I'd like to get back to you because I do want to get to a couple of the other things that you're involved in now, which I think maybe the question I'd like to ask that sort of leads us to that is one, the community base, which you've seen here tonight. You've witnessed sort of how we do things with VBC. We love the community. We love building community around storytelling. How was building that community for you within your squadron, within the Navy? You were part of the Navy for how many years?
5 years.
So, and you said even today you've still talked to some squad mates even today.
I do. I mean, some of my best friends were developed in the squadron. Most of them, well, I won't say that. Most of my best friends were in the squadron. Some of them were in my shop, some of them weren't, but I met them through the squadron. Yeah, for sure.
And I did write down like a question, like, did you ever actually meet the commander? What would you call the person that runs? Is it the captain that runs the USS Saratoga?
It is.
It's on an admiral. Admiral's above that.
It's not an admiral. There would be an admiral over the Sixth Fleet, but there would be a captain over the ship. So we had multiple captains for I think we had a different captain every deployment I had. But the one I remember in Desert Shield, Desert Storm was Captain Mobley.
Did you ever meet him?
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. He was a fairly social individual. Ex prisoner of war. Ton of respect for anybody that goes through that and then decides to come back and actually lead after that. He was I think he was a pretty amazing guy.
You mentioned the word lead. What was it about leadership in the Navy? Is there something that you took away from the Navy in terms of leadership, especially given, you know, what you're the CEO now of Ministry Brands?
Yeah, I took a lot from the Navy. I don't know that I digested it all while I was in, but I've certainly a lot of kind of how my belief system, I think, started off in the Navy. A lot around kind of how you treat people and the military, and I'm sure this isn't specific just to the Navy, but there's aspects of how you can be successful in the military that I think translate very, very well to civilian world that aren't particularly obvious. So one of them, for instance, is when you're in the military, you don't get to pick your staff. You don't get to hire your staff.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really fire your staff, and no one can really quit, but they can quit. Like if you get the context of what I'm saying there.
Yeah.
You have to figure out kind of the best of each person you have, and you have to figure out how to orient them in a way to make the team successful. And I think by doing that, you can do that in the civilian world as well. Like you'll have great people. The difference is in the civilian world, they actually theoretically want to work for you. They took a job for you. You can do something about it if it doesn't work out. But that's sometimes just the easy path. The hard path is to figure out what each individual on your team, what their super strength is, what their superpower is, and then coordinate a team that maximizes that. Something the military kind of forces you to do. But if you can figure out how to translate it and take it into a civilian world, I think what you can do there is fairly amazing.
I want to speak about that transition in a second, but did you feel it was sort of serendipitous that your Navy career ended the day that the Saratoga was also decommissioned? That happened on the same day?
Immensely. Now some of that was not accidental. I'd stored up a bunch of leave, so the day I stepped off the Saratoga on her last journey was actually my last day in the Navy. But yeah, that was pretty awesome for me, and I still think about it that way. Her last day was my last day.
So how did your transition go out of, I imagine like you went to photo school, so you had like skills that could be applied in the civilian world. But how did you navigate that transition?
Yeah, one thing kind of leads to another, but I found myself directly out of the military. First of all, I'd leveraged the benefits of the military while I was in. So I wound up taking 2 years worth of college while I was in. I took a bunch of courses that I didn't need, that didn't actually help me towards a degree, but I came out far more educated than I went in. If pretty much every semester I took a class, even if it didn't apply towards the major I was going for, I always took a class. So I wanted to finish that degree when I got out. So I went over to the University of North Florida. And my first official day, which was actually my first official day on the 5-year mark of getting out of the military, I went over to the University of North Florida and went to, believe it or not, a toga party. And I met this fine young lady there, who, 30 years later is still my wife. So kind of feel like it was just kind of meant to be. I went to a job interview at a very small borderline startup company at the time called America Online. They interviewed a couple thousand people. They hired 10 on the first day. I was one of those 10. And that kind of started me off in tech, and I've been in tech since. Yeah, those are my 2 daughters and my wife.
So how was there a calling to continue to serve, to continue to do something beyond your service, or did that take some years to sort of develop, like you wanted to keep helping in some way?
Yeah, I think that took some years. I think it also took maybe some maturity. I think I got to a point in my life where I realized that, there's a moral obligation to give back. And when you find yourself in a leadership role in a place where you can do more towards that, you kind of need to do more towards that. So I've just been fortunate enough to be in that position now.
Before we get to ministry brands, I know we wanted to talk about this. This is really exciting. This is something that you just completed. You've done this for, is it a couple years now? Holidays for the Heroes?
No, first year for me.
Okay.
Yeah, not my company, to be clear. A gentleman by the name of Ed Rossich. He's an ex Air Force guy. I've known him probably for about 10 years, but in a business capacity. Figured out he was running this nonprofit and doing it as kind of a side job. Essentially, what he does is he brings E4 and below people that are deployed or in a financial position where they cannot make it home for the holidays, and he just seeks donations and seeks people that are interested in helping, and aligns the particular service member with the donations and brings them home. And I reached out to him because I wanted to do something personally. And as he was kind of describing it, he shared a couple examples. One of them was a Navy guy who hadn't been home in 3 years. I was like, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, we can do something about that. And then I was fortunate enough that I could get my company to help with that as well. And as I talked to other people were willing to get involved. So I think we got about 40 people home for the holidays this year, which I don't know, felt pretty good.
Well, to give that context, what was the longest time you spent away from home when you were in?
For me, it was probably not more than a year. But 3 years is forever.
I'll bet. How long did that almost year feel to you before you were able to see family again, see home again?
Yeah, it was rough. It was rough. And there were some tragedies that occurred during it that I think made it even rougher. But it was manageable. I think things are different today. I don't know if it feels the same way. We didn't have internet. We didn't have email. You pulled in port, and hopefully when you got to that payphone, your family member got the call, because they didn't know when you were coming. They didn't know when you were pulling into port. It's not necessarily fair to be upset with them. They weren't standing by the phone. But if you didn't get them, you didn't get them. So it's kind of a different scenario. I don't know if it translates the same way. But I think it was really tough to keep connections with family members when I was deployed anyway. I'm sure many of you had similar type situations.
Chris, I'll ask you to unmute.
What's that?
Oh, it's Chris Parolo. Sorry, to unmute. You had your hand raised. Go ahead, Chris.
I want to take an opportunity to ask you this question. An aircraft carrier, the carrier is the platform, but the air wing is the weapon.
That's right.
And what you do on that platform is you merge two distinctive large populations together for a deployment, the air wing and the ship's company.
That's right.
And I always wondered, although I had my 3 weeks on a carrier and I got to see things from that perspective, but were there any boundaries or barriers or animosities of any kind? I mean, everything works so smoothly, but you've got two distinct jobs. running the vessel and then running that or service or running the weapon, so to speak.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that culture?
Well, so it's kind of the brown shoe versus black shoe culture on board a carrier. I think that's largely what we called it. The brown shoes were the folks attached to the squadron or airmen, and then the black shoe was the seaman. Yeah, there was a little bit, nothing. I think at the end of the day, nothing that was terrifying or insurmountable. But there was kind of a viewpoint of, hey, you see someone that you can look by the color of the skin that they haven't seen sunlight in 90 days. What are you doing on the flight deck? Same token, if you found yourself in the bowels of the ship, usually at the byproduct of some hazing event, I'll tell you, that person that when you open up that very, very cold air conditioned door and you see the guy inside of there and he sees that you're wearing a fire retardant flight deck jersey, it's not going to be a good conversation. Close the door and run. So, but outside of that, like, all the common areas we met, and I think, when we were in port, we were all in the Navy serving together. It wasn't as bad as some might imagine.
Right, certainly not a Marine and Navy kind of a relationship.
I'm not going there, Chris.
Okay.
Doug, you just put a comment in the chat. Doug, did you serve on an aircraft carrier?
I served on board LPH, a couple of LHAs, LPDs, amphibious ships. Probably the best relationship aboard USS Guam in Grenada and Beirut. That was a combat cruise. Captain Quarterman, the skipper of the ship. I've never met a finer naval officer in my life, and all of us in the squadron felt the same way about him. One of my other ships, I put the comment in there, my last deployment, the ship's XO was a perfect ship's XO. He took care of the sailors, and the Marines basically be damned, and had some rules in place that we didn't agree with, but it's his ship. It's his wardroom, things of that sort. So our battle cry was, you can make it harder, but you can't make it longer.
It's a good battle.
John, why did you call on Doug?
Oh, I love Doug. He always has a good story.
That's awesome.
Clem, you have your hand up.
Yes, sir. Chris, thanks for being on the show. I find it interesting. I'm curious. You have a carrier, you have accompanying ships, I guess destroyers. I don't know how many different ships, but who has the overall command of the whole fleet? Is that come right from the commander of the carrier? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, ultimately the admiral has command of the entire fleet. But my view on it was the carrier sets the tone and the pace for what's going on. The E2, which was that, I'm sure we've all seen a picture of an E2. It's a gigantic prop plane. It's got a big dish. It's the one that's looking at everything that's going on. So largely that's communicating back with the carrier, at least that's my understanding. And then operations are basically managed from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, what replaced the TARP system?
Satellites.
Drones. Okay, satellites and drones. So when did that phase in start and when did it complete? When was TARP completely obsolete?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I got out in '94. It was still a thing.
Okay.
I can find no trace of it now, so I'm guessing it's completely gone.
Right.
But,
So
but
94 it was.
I imagine drones would be able to solve for what it did pretty rapidly.
And at that time, and Desert Shield, Desert Storm satellite, just the resolution was not good enough to get the kind of.
It wasn't good enough, and it wasn't dependable enough either. Cloud cover can do a lot for satellite.
Okay. And another question, I'm a historian, and I'm curious, are those photos that the TARP took archived anywhere? Are they accessible to historians or maybe future historians after they're declassified? Do you have any idea?
I'm sure they're somewhere.
Okay.
I have no idea where though.
If they're not stuck together like super glue in
Well,
an
after
archive
they're
somewhere.
processed, they're fine.
Okay.
It's before they're processed, when
Got it.
they're wet foam.
Okay.
Just wanted to bring up a couple more. So I wanted to bring up some images so that everybody could see sort of like what do these pictures kind of look like. I have a couple here in the slide deck of some of the pictures that were taken from a TARPS pod system. At least these two.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, that's pretty clear for the time
That
frame.
sure is.
And if you
Yes.
figure if they're taking that from 10 to 15,000 feet, probably.
At
Man.
least.
And this is just one from behind Chris, you can see there. This is was this her coming back into port the last time?
I don't know, because I think.
Or this was the return. This was actually returned from Desert Storm, I believe.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
All of our returns looked similar to that.
And lastly, Chris, I'd be remiss if I didn't have you talk about where you're at now with Ministry Brands and what you guys have going on, if you could fill us in.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of a company called Ministry Brands. It's a privately held company, roughly 700 employees. Essentially, what we provide is technology and services that enable 90,000 mission-focused organizations to grow, protect, and engage their communities. So put it in context, we offer a vast array of solutions, including CRM, donor management, digital giving and payments, custom websites, communication, media, event planning, background screening, and a whole lot of other things that I've not mentioned. We process about 6.5 billion in payments, call it 2.5 million background checks a year, and host millions of users through websites and mobile apps. And I've been doing it, I've been with the company for about 3 years. CEO for about the last almost year and a half now.
What made you decide to take that position with the company? Other than they offered it to you, probably.
Well, the CEO position, or just to come to the company in general?
CEO.
Pretty much they offered it to me. So I was already the COO, kind of loved what I did, loved the team that we built, and when when the CEO position came open, it just seemed like the right next step.
Mm-hmm. Is it this leadership role? Do you bring in those traits that you looked up to in the Navy for where you're at now?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. You know, there was one gentleman in particularly that, and there was lots, but one leader specifically that I think made a lot of difference in my life. Kind of unlocked what my strengths were, even some that I didn't see or recognize at the time. And I'd like to think that I'm capable of doing that for other people as well.
Do you what was his name?
Lieutenant Dan Abrams.
What really stood out to you about him?
A number of things. He was I was a very smart and witty individual, a bit sarcastic and pointed at the time, but he did it in a way that actually helped you. So I think he was a very supportive leader of the team. While he didn't necessarily say this out loud, you could tell that he genuinely cared about the team, and his actions and frankly his humble demeanor really made you want to lean in and do anything you could for him.
That's how I describe Todd. I will echo that for Todd.
Thank you, Sean.
Chris, I want to thank you so much for taking the time with us tonight, especially to dive into this sort of really obscure piece of the F-14, the TARP system, you know, being on a carrier. I think we learned a lot tonight. It's part of our mission really just to be educated. And I think, boy, that was a great education tonight. And I want to thank Trey. I'm not sure if he's still on, Trey, for sort of providing some historical context to what you went through. And boy, we'd sure hope that you'd come back and join us again.
Be glad to. Thank you guys so much for the invite. And thank you all for serving.
Thank you,
and
Chris.
thank you all for being here this evening. Thursday night, we'll be back with Glenn. And then make sure you register for next Monday night for our screening. Again, Chris Bacon, we'll talk to you again soon. Everyone, have a great evening.